Now, to talk more about these issues, I'm joined here in studio by Irvin Waller. You're a criminologist at the University of Ottawa and also the author of Less Law, More Order. Thanks for joining us. We heard a lot from the minister about numbers and statistics, although he tells me he doesn't play the statistics game anyway. But if I look at StatsCan, they're telling us violent crime is down and crime's down overall. Are we really in danger of being too alarmist as Canadians when we see an isolated incident in suburban Toronto or Calgary?
I think we've got to be very careful about these statistics. There are two sources of statistics. The crimes that get known to the police, and those have been going down, and the crimes that affect victims, the victimization survey that came out about a month ago. And if you look at the victimization survey, crime has been pretty steady in Canada, particularly violent crime, over the last 10 years. And if you go back over 30 years, then violent crime and property crime are way above what they used to be in the 60s. So I think we do have to be serious about the crime issue. For me, 600 murders are 600 murders that we should be working to reduce. Whether it's 610 or 620 is not the issue. We've got to address the needs of victims, and we've got to do it in ways that work. And when I listen to Minister Nicholson, it reminds me very much of the person who has a hammer and everything is a nail. So he thinks, because he's Minister of Justice, that tinkering somehow with the criminal code is going to solve these problems. And he's done some things that I agree with. I think dangerous offender legislation, okay. He talks about keeping dangerous people off the streets. And I was involved in the 70s in the first, as a public servant, in the first dangerous offender legislation. So some of these things are good, and he set up a federal ombudsman on crime victims. This is also good. But the reality is that we know how to reduce violent crime. The World Health Organization in 2002 came out with a series of recommendations about what should be done, and we don't see either the Conservatives or the Liberals or the NDP at the federal or the provincial levels in this country debating them. He's just been meeting with Eric Holder. One of the things he could have been talking to Eric Holder about is what the United States has done about gangs. So 20% of our homicides are associated with gangs. The Boston strategy in the mid-90s was a success because they diagnosed the problem and then they succeeded in eliminating adolescent murder victims and reducing adult murder victims.
I want to get back to a point that you said, though. You said we know how to reduce violent crime. Really? I mean, is there a bona fide strategy we should be following that we're not?
Absolutely, and you can look on the website of Public Safety Canada and you can see what they say and what a very little money has been put aside to
what you're talking
pay
about
for.
Reduction in poverty. I mean, what are they concretely?
No,
briefly?
It's a great idea to reduce poverty and to reduce unemployment, and yes, that will reduce crime. But those aren't the things that a government should be doing. They should be doing what Alberta is doing. Alberta set up a task force. It had a police leader there. It had a law dean. It had a young person. It had a native. And it looked at the evidence, and it looked at what was going on in Alberta, and it came out with recommendations. Just before an election, and they were re-elected, they put $500 million new money into a strategy that balances enforcement, so a few more police, a few more prison cells, a few more laws to make it tougher on offenders, a major component on treatment, that's to deal with alcoholism and drugs that came up a lot, and a strategy outreaching to youth. They have a gang strategy. What we know about the sorts of incidents that have been hitting the headlines in Vancouver recently, or the ones in Toronto that you mentioned in your introduction, is that you have to combine smart enforcement, where you really identify the people most involved in these, and you also go after bringing them out. That's how they reduced these murders in Boston. That's how they did it more recently in Chicago, and that's what we should be doing in our cities.
I want to go through to the random violent nature of what has been going on here and the influence that firearms have had. Is there a trend here that Canadians should be worried about, even though we don't see it in the statistics yet?
Well, I think we do see it in the statistics. Mr. Nicholson may not read the Statistics Canada publications, but there has been an alarming trend in the number of handgun-related homicides, and these are nearly all drugs and guns and gangs happening. I think that trend has been visible for 15 years, well, at least 10, because when it first starts, you don't know, but it's well established. And the ministers of justice think that the solutions are only tinkering with the criminal code or adding more prosecutors. It's very clear, as he would have found out from Eric Holder, the Attorney General of the United States, that the strategies that work combine some enforcement, some prevention. Now, Vic Taves, Minister Taves, comes from Manitoba, one of the most spectacular success stories in preventing car theft that also leads to death because some of the joyriders lose control of the car, is homegrown. It's in Manitoba. So what I would like to see is governments at all levels in this country, not just the federal parliament, debating evidence-based solutions that will actually deliver fewer victims, which will deliver safer communities. And yes, it's important to listen to victims and it's important to listen to law enforcement, but it's more important to look at evidence. That's what we do in the medical area.
And we'll continue to try and get more of that evidence out of many different corners. Thanks for joining us today, Mr. Waller.